So, where is the game?
The gaming system without the ultimate fighting game. Tekken for the Sony PlayStation, powered by Namco.
Pick up a six-pack!
Oh, that's a pretty good one. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear that even though Sega did everything they could get a leg up on the competition with their Shadow Drop of the Sega Saturn, that lead didn't really last very long when the PlayStation actually came out and just absolutely destroyed it. However, Sega did have a few bright spots with the Sega Saturn, and one of the main bright spots that they had was Virtua Fighter, which was still a really big deal at the time due to the fact that it was one of the first 3D fighters. Wanting to take away some of that from Sony, not from Sony, from Sega, Sony ended up going to Namco, who at the time were planning to produce their own 3D fighting game to compete with Virtua Fighter, to help them make the hardware for the arcade game so that it could easily be ported to the PlayStation. Namco agreed, and thus Tekken was born. And though it took a couple of years for Tekken to really find its footing as a viable fighting game franchise, it is still a pretty interesting entry in the genre. So its plot is about what you would expect from any fighting game at the time. It's basically an international tournament with a bunch of martial arts weirdos going at it. Though its lore is famously insane, despite the fact that this game is trying to be more grounded than something like Street Fighter. But that does make it pretty memorable, but that insanity wouldn't really start until much later in the series. And really, the personality of the first Tekken game isn't all that strong. At a glance, you could probably mistake this for Virtua Fighter, but what are you gonna do? It's the first game, and it was intended to compete with Virtua Fighter, so it's understandable that there would be some similarities at the start. That's not to say that Tekken wasn't breaking any new ground when it came out. It was one of the first fighting games to really feature texture mapping, which allowed for more detailed character models than what you would have seen in Virtua Fighter, which had to rely on flat colors and textures to build their character models. Something else that was pretty innovative about Tekken at the time was they took a very different approach to the fighting game controls. Rather than go for the 6-button system that you would see in the Street Fighter series, or the 3-button system from Virtua Fighter, Tekken introduced a 4-button system. Essentially, the idea is that every button controls a specific limb, and the key of the game is understanding which attacks are best to follow up with what, and figuring out which ones work best as counters and all that stuff. It actually does make for a pretty good fighter. One of the issues I've always had with Virtua Fighter is that I feel it's too simple, while at the same time also being too complicated, because due to the simplicity of the 3-button system, rather than having a wider variety of attacks to experiment with at the start, you essentially have to go straight into button combinations, which is a lot harder to understand. Tekken naturally has a little more depth to it, but I would still say that I greatly prefer the 6-button system from Street Fighter. I just feel like there's a better progression of skill as you play through those games as opposed to these ones. Still though, Tekken is still pretty good fun, and I remember when Tony and I did this game for the showcase in the early days of the channel. We had a pretty good time with it. Or at least he had a good time with it. I'm not very good at fighting games, and Tony enjoys reminding me of that. So, as I said, Tekken, in its inception, sort of had a hard time finding a way to separate itself from Virtua Fighter. The two games were compared very frequently, and that didn't change with Tekken 2. But by the time Tekken 3 came out, the series had really found its identity and its stride. And Tekken 3 is still widely considered to be one of the best fighting games on the original PlayStation. Tekken still sees releases today, the most recent one being last year's Tekken 8, which is a phenomenal one-on-one brawler. And one I recommend you give a shot if you haven't already. So I don't think this series is going to be going anywhere anytime soon. And you know what? A little competition in the genre isn't going to hurt anyone. Who knows? Maybe we'll get another crossover. What would be really cool is Tekken versus Mortal Kombat. Wouldn't that be fun? But anyway, that's going to do it for Tekken, guys. Be sure to join me tomorrow as we take a look at the next game in the series. In the retrospect, I mean. See you then.